right. Thanks everybody for joining for our next in our pre-IPO briefing series. My name is Slava. I'm with Vincent, your platform to getting access information for all things alternative investments. We also have with us Jan-Erik from Sacra. Thank you, Jan-Erik, for joining.
Great to be here.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of great companies. We've got lots of good feedback. And today we want to cover Glean. Many of you have heard of OpenAI. Many of you have heard of Anthropic. Obviously, AI is super trendy. Not everybody has heard of Glean, but Glean is a darling and it has a different perspective. It's really focused more on the workplace AI. So we're really excited for today's conversation. And this is brought to you by our partner, Upmarket. And as always, we'll go to the next slide, which is our compliance department. Nothing in this presentation should be construed as an offer to sell securities or a solicitation of an offer to buy securities. All investments involve risk and the possibility of loss, including loss of principal, and neither past performance nor forward-looking information is a guarantee of future results. With that said, we're going to have Jan-Erik give an overview of the company, and then I'll dive in with questions. As all of you have any thoughts that come to mind or any questions, feel free to follow up in the Q&A area. All right, Jan-Erik, take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, Glean, very interesting company, enterprise search company with a lot of AI around it. And the best way to sort of think about what it is Google for your workspace. And it was actually founded by a former senior engineer at Google, Arvind Jain. And it's a space that has been tried many times by different companies to crack this like enterprise search over all your files, all your apps, all your docs. And Google themselves tried it like 22 years ago, and it's been kind of a graveyard of startups. So Glean is sort of the latest entrant, and so far, one of the fastest growing, most successful attempts at it. So yeah, but we can go into more what they do. Sweet. Yeah, they really started early on, well before LLMs were a thing, about 3 years before ChatGPT, with basically a search engine powered by early forms of AI. But the product really took off post ChatGPT, post LLMs becoming something that you could build into your product. Today, the product looks a lot like ChatGPT in some respects. There's an AI chatbot, but there's also a bunch of other components to it. There's AI, built apps inside the platform that do different things. They have their own APIs for other companies to build integrations with, and various other tools like that. And then there's a whole sort of raft of enterprise specific aspects to the product. One of the big ones is governance. So if you're a multinational corporation, you have a ton of sort of permissions and viewability restrictions on different types of data, different files, different apps. And so a huge part of what's going on at Glean on the back end is kind of this permissioning system, making sure that random employee, number three, can only see exactly the stuff that they're supposed to be seeing. And yeah, there's more, sort of more to the product, but we can go into it as we get there in the conversation. And yeah, one of the sort of, as you said, sort of a darling of the AI space, one of the standout kind of enterprise companies. They've been raising aggressively. And getting valued aggressively. So right now, last primary round, 4.6 billion. Secondary price on the market is roughly around 5. And yeah, laundry list of great investors, Sequoia, Altimeter, Kleiner Perkins. So yeah, they've been successful on the fundraising front for sure.
All right, already worth about 5 billion on the secondary market. So they're obviously doing something right. You mentioned they already have about 110 million of ARR. Let me just start with the basics. I know you gave a little bit of an overview. What does Google for the workplace mean? Like, can you just give me a use case or two, like really simplified? How are their clients? What are the top one or two use cases of how people are actually incorporating Glean into their productivity?
Yeah, so two of the big ones that have emerged as like a sort of the landing use cases, how Glean gets into an organization. One is sort of engineers who need to troubleshoot issues with code. And so they'll get an error code, from a tool like Sentry, and then they can plug it into Glean, and they can quickly search through their entire code base documentation, but also like external libraries, and they can quickly troubleshoot issues by just having basically something that can search across all of their internal info about their code base and find where this issue might be. So that was one big one early on. The other big one early on was onboarding. So when you are a new employee and you join a company, you don't know anything, and often finding that information, you don't even know what tool to search in or who to ask. And so what Glean does, one cool thing is, yes, it has search through apps. So if you need to find the time off policy, it can find you that in your HR platform. But also there is a concept of, kind of ownership and employee management in Glean. So for example, if you need to find the person directly responsible for, your time off, who you should be asking about your time off, there's a concept of that inside the Glean platform, that it knows your organization, the organization chart, and who's responsible for what, so it can find you that person to talk to. So those are kind of the two, HR and engineering were two of the big early ones.
Nice. And in like a holy grail, Glean is crushing it 5, 10 years from now. What does Glean as like the productivity tool for the corporation look like? What do you envision? What do they envision?
Yeah, I think what they envision is, if you're sort of using Glean to the total, extent that they would imagine you do, this becomes your sort of layer into all of your work, the sort of interface layer into everything that you do. Whereas today, like, you might be going in between Slack, email, Confluence, Salesforce on the enterprise side, you would not be directly interfacing with those tools nearly as much. You would be asking Glean, remind me of our Q4 target, you know, who's the point person on the Vincent account, and you would potentially, then you'd say, okay, write me a sales email, to send to Vincent so I can get to be the sponsor on their next podcast. And it would do that, learning from all the previous emails that you've sent that it has access to. And so you can imagine a world where, like Google, for example, started as a interface layer into the web where you would search, cat video, find one. And today it's more of like a suite of products. You could spend your whole day in G Suite doing work. I think Glean is sort of imagining a similar outcome where you spend a lot of your day in Glean versus in these like destination apps that they integrate with.
Nice. I mean, that's a huge vision for sure. So how do they make the money? What's the where's that 110 million ARR coming from, and what are the revenue opportunities?
Yeah, so right now, it's pretty standard B2B SaaS fare. They have a per seat pricing model subscription that comes out to roughly $40 a user. We think probably for some of the larger enterprise deployments, it's slightly lower than that. Yeah, I think a big part of the game is expanding seats, and they tend to land in these engineering HR teams. The goal is to grow from there. One thing we've observed is, the sales cycles are pretty long. So they're really trying to move up market into these much larger companies. The sales cycles up there are longer. So a lot of the early revenue has been these sort of mid-range companies, 90-day sales cycles. But what they're going towards is kind of the longer, up to 6 months, type sales cycle. Unit economics, pretty standard B2B SaaS, but probably with a larger services component, because again, big companies, big enterprises require more of a services component generally for implementation. But also Glean is a slightly more, it's not a plug and play operation just yet. So there's a fair amount of configuration that goes on with customers to map out their universe of docs and files and apps that requires some sort of onboarding at this point.
Or
Yeah.
does that services customization, does that eat into the margin and how pretty of a darling this could be?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, I think if you look at companies like
Because
Salesforce,
I consider like Slack pretty like plug and play, but I consider Salesforce much more customization required. Is that fair?
definitely. I would say, yeah, the core SaaS business, could be like the 80% margins range, whereas like the services stuff is probably, looking at these comps, like probably in the 30% range. So, I mean, I don't think it's a huge, uh, I don't think it's a huge impact. Like, this isn't like a Palantir where it's like a consulting business masquerading as a software business. This is a software business with, you know, a consulting component. So, I mean, I would sort of clock the gross margin around 70%, with upside as they actually automate a lot of this stuff.
Do you have any sense for that 110 million in 2024? How much of that was straight software revenue versus how much of it was consulting revenue?
Yeah, I would guess probably like 80/20, like roughly in that region, or
80%
70/30.
software based.
Yeah, man.
Great. And Obviously people know OpenAI, Anthropic, and others, Gemini, Claude, etc. Who do we consider the competitors for Glean? Who are the heads-up competitors? I imagine the OpenAIs and all of them could become the competitors, but who do we consider today the competitors head-to-head for Glean?
Yeah, definitely. So there's kind of like I mentioned, this was a graveyard of startup ideas. There's been companies trying to do enterprise search for decades, and it's been basically a complete failure until we had LLMs that could synthesize and make sense of this. So there's a bunch of AI native startups that are doing roughly what Glean is doing. You have Hebia, which was sort of initially positioned more one-to-one, similar with Glean, but now is more focused on finance. You have Sana AI, which is also in a sort of similar area as Glean, and then you have Writer, which Writer is unique because they sort of have a proprietary LLM model. They're a little bit less focused on like having all the workflow products that Glean has. So it's less kind of a, you know, um, it's less focused on helping people do everything at your organization and search over everything. But these are kind of the main, figures in the space. And then you also do have sort of these like Zapier's, Airtable's, Notions that do have similar functionality to some degree now that they're incorporating more AI technology. So just like automating the movement of data across your organization is something that Glean is not alone in. There's plenty of other companies doing it, but no one quite at the enterprise scale and sort of form factor of Glean.
Got it. So would you consider Zapier, I'm a fan of that company, do you consider Glean a replacement or are they collaborating?
I definitely think you could. I would imagine that companies would have both because they do serve different. Zapier is more for connecting kind of these long tail applications to each other, or getting stuff into a Google Sheet or Google Doc, more of like the edge cases. But they are kind of like with the sort of LLM craze, they are moving more into giving you full kind of automation across different aspects of your business. But realistically, no enterprise right now is thinking of it as a Glean versus Zapier bake off or versus Airtable, but they're sort of developing similar capabilities.
Gotcha. The OpenAIs and such have raised billions and billions of dollars because of the cost of having these proprietary foundational LLMs. Glean has raised under $1 billion. Are they creating native LLMs on their own that are homegrown, or are they leveraging what's already out there and nuancing on top?
Yeah, from what I understand, there's nothing proprietary about their models, and they've been heavily reliant and were an early partner with OpenAI. So a lot of like GPT-4 was a big moment because that sort of made a lot of this stuff possible. Whereas GPT-3 and 3.5 were not quite sophisticated enough as models. So yeah, that's definitely part of the sort of less capital intensive approach is that they are using the best models for the job.
Since they're leveraging OpenAI, is there any reason to believe that 3 years from now, OpenAI just doesn't come out with their own version of Glean?
Yeah, I'm sure that is in the most sort of bullish roadmaps that Sam Altman has created. And they actually, you might remember when OpenAI warned their investors not to invest in certain other AI companies. One of them was Anthropic, one of them was Perplexity, one of them was Glean. And so there's definitely reason to think that they are interested in the space. And they have some, with Google Drive, OneDrive, you can create little workspaces in ChatGPT and invite your coworkers into them to work together. Um, there's glimmers of sort of indications that they want to play in this enterprise segment, but would it be as easy as, just sort of wanting to do it? I mean, with Perplexity, they sort of just integrated search into ChatGPT. And if you ask me, it's roughly as good as Perplexity. But Glean, they were around for they've been around for 5 years. They were around for 3 years before they launched anything with LLMs. And a lot of that time was spent on the sort of plumbing of the building an enterprise search tool. And that means it's a very like technologically complicated task to build these like native feeling integrations with Salesforce, with Confluence, with every B2B SaaS app that enterprises use. And it's not something you can just pick up off the shelf. And so that I think is where they sort of position a lot of their advantage, and their lead is that they spent 3 years building this kind of plumbing that is hard to replicate.
Just a reminder for anybody that has any questions, feel free to go to the Q&A and I'll look to get to it. You mentioned these more native competitors. What about the more basic, larger competitors? We talked about OpenAI. What about the Googles, the Salesforces, the Microsofts, the Metas? How should we think about those companies competing or collaborating with Glean as we think about their prospects 3 to 5 years out?
Yeah, so Arvind has called out Microsoft Copilot as the most direct competitor that they have today, which makes sense because so many enterprises are all in on Microsoft. Microsoft does have access to, if you are all in on Microsoft, they have access to all your email, all your files, all your docs. And so having a sort of, uh, the latest and greatest GPT models integrated into Copilot, which has access to all your files, makes Microsoft probably the most meaningful competitor in that sense. You do have Google, Gemini's models are really good, especially at taking in giant amounts of data and context and making sense of it. So, Google, you have cloud search, they're integrating AI into G Suite now. I think the odds there that they're going to make a sort of sustained play are perhaps low. I mean, just based on their sort of history with releasing products. Salesforce has a little bit of this too, but it's more sales marketing centric with their AI agents play. So of the sort of giants, I think Microsoft is definitely the biggest competitor. I think the main thing with Glean is agnostic to your stack. So it doesn't matter if you use Microsoft, maybe use Google for other things. You might have 100 other SaaS apps. So where Microsoft might have an advantage for maybe smaller companies that are more kind of full stack Microsoft, I think where Glean is sort of different is, the more broad, full cloud coverage.
Let's talk about the future. So, what are the growth opportunities? I mean, I know you gave the pie in the sky opportunity as to kind of being a new layer as to how you access enterprise. But, what does this look like 3 to 5 years from now? What can this become?
Yeah, so a lot of the expansion sort of vision for them right now is about bringing on these companies with really big seats and selling into really large global enterprises. And a big part of that too is expanding sort of right now. There's a lot of larger startups, tech companies are sort of their core customers, which is not uncommon for other startups. So the big sort of verticals they've identified are basically financial services, retail, and manufacturing. So they already have a pilot going with Citigroup. So that's one big one. It's sort of expanding into these more traditional, larger enterprises. And then, geographic expansion is a big one. So they're looking hard at Asia Pacific as a big expansion region. And then, I think, advancing the capabilities of the platform are key. So some of the stuff I talked about before, they're really riding on the advantages of, building on other people's models that continue to get better. And ChatGPT has gotten a lot better since Glean launched. There's reasoning models now that are better at doing sort of autonomous tasks. And so, if Glean can go from, I have to go and identify a sales target, I have to go and queue up an email, I have to edit the email, then send it. They could potentially take out some steps there where they have an agent, looking at who your sales targets are every morning and writing a sequence of 30, 40, 50 emails that maybe you don't even have to assess, and then you can send them. So yeah, it's bigger companies, larger deployments, and then more advanced sort of AI stuff.
Is this mostly sales-led growth, or is there any product-led growth? I imagine it's mostly sales given the size of the contracts.
Yeah, it's not really. You can't really go and just try the product. So yeah, there's not really a freemium offering. It's pretty sales led. I mean, I think there's a lot of organic inbound interest because of the sort of mind share that they've quickly gathered in the space.
Is
Yeah,
there any
pretty
sense
sales led.
for is there any sense for how big the sales team is and how much money they're spending on that?
That's a good question. I don't think I have the exact number, but I think it's roughly like maybe a 20-30% sales.
Got it. Got it. We have a question also. Is there any additional you want to cover as to what the future could look like in regards to agents with Glean, or do you feel like you covered that already?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a space a lot of companies are going after, B2B context, especially. I mean, Anthropic is one of the biggest ones actually here, mostly with code. But yeah, I think it's one of the ones that is like sort of we talked about with OpenAI, like what the ultra bull case was if they automate, if they sort of automate a general intelligence, that can do everything that a human does, but better. And I think Glean is sort of, betting on a similar kind of extreme upside case, where if you have an agent plugged into your entire business, all of your docs and files, all your conversations, and knows your business, that could be a huge unlock if it could sort of act autonomously to help you with all aspects of your company. So definitely think it's
Let's
a big part of the vision.
let's think forward a few years. OpenAI came out with their own product in the enterprise space. Copilot is doing well with Microsoft. Who knows what the other players are doing between Google, Salesforce, etc. Is there space for Glean to be a winner alongside those others, or does it need to really dominate and make it seem as if the OpenAI product is not worth using?
Yeah, I think there's a case. The most sort of plausible vision I have, if I think about maybe what a more bumpy road looks like, we do get an OpenAI enterprise product. And actually, they've already demoed a sales product at a recent conference in Japan that would give you sort of what I was describing, a list of salespeople, and then it could help you generate outreach to them. And it would also tell you who was sort of maybe most primed, to buy based on various sort of product-led signals. So we know they're going to do this. I think the key thing for Glean is there will probably be companies that are not comfortable funneling all their enterprise, corporate proprietary information into OpenAI for various reasons. I mean, one is just that OpenAI makes money from training models on better and better data, whereas Glean makes money from a SaaS subscription, and they have been sort of proven and positioned for the enterprise. So I think that will be sort of Glean's main advantage on a positioning front is just that they are, an enterprise search company. They are not looking to use your data to train their models on to make them better for everyone, I think. And then yeah, with Microsoft, it's just about being sort of, tech forward to an extent too. Like a lot of companies would probably use that Microsoft Copilot agent, but a lot of companies probably, I think Glean is betting that a lot of companies will not want to.
Got it. Give me your base bull bear case on what this could look like in regards to Glean's future and the potential projections.
Yeah, definitely. I think sort of the base case, the way we sort of have come down on it, is that they've developed a lead, a lead built on, pretty deep, actual technical work on integrations and getting LLMs to work across all these different docs and files and apps. So our sort of projection there is basically by 2029, like 2.7 billion in ARR. And that just encompasses, models getting better, capabilities getting better. This is no longer a search engine primarily for your data. It's a place where people do work. The bull case is that, agents really take off. And we're seeing very rapid, impressive achievements by OpenAI and Claude. And as these kind of funnel into Glean and get productized into Glean, which will take time, there's a case where this becomes sort of an indispensable tool for every part of the organization, not just engineering, HR, but it becomes a core tool for sales and elsewhere, which, we sort of peg it at 4.3 billion. I think the bear case, you kind of laid out some of it, would be that OpenAI eats up the sort of tech forward, early adopters of this kind of stuff. You have Microsoft, doing its own Copilot, making it better. And then the sort of third vector there is like SaaS tools themselves developing better AI. I mean, what B2B SaaS company is not working on AI LLMs at this moment in some way? And so I think a lot of the original Glean value proposition was based in this time when none of them had AI. So Glean was sort of the AI synthesis layer for all this data and all these files. But there's a world where every B2B SaaS app that people use in the workplace has, a robust sort of AI interface and connectors to other apps where maybe the value proposition of Glean is less significant.
It's interesting, even in your bear case, assuming 1.4 billion ARR with an 8x multiple, you still have an 11.5 billion enterprise value in 2029, which is not something to sneeze at. We'll get to price in a second. I just wanted to share that here. So with the bear case, 11.5 billion, base case, 40 billion, and the bullish case, 106 billion. So when you come up with those amounts, prices, valuations, how do you think about the right private and public comps to compare it to when you think about how to price this type of company?
Yeah, it's tricky because enterprise search, is not something that has a huge public presence. So we looked at a lot of these companies that I mentioned before the enterprise AI search comps like Sana, Writer, Hebbia. There's another company called MoveWorks that just hit 100 million ARR. And they are all roughly in the same range. I mean, Hebbia, Writer, Glean are all around 35, 40x. So, in the market, none of these prices are outlandish. I mean, you have other companies in AI raising at 100, 150x, like Perplexity recently did.
The X
So
revenue, right?
the X axis is revenue, yes, and the
Yeah.
number in the bubble is the multiple. So, they're growing very fast. At high revenue scale, at 100. Yeah, I don't see these prices as out of bounds, especially with those sort of 100x plus players that we're seeing.
Gotcha. So today, the last price they raised twice in 2024, most recently at 4.6 billion. Before that, I think it was 2022, they were closer to a billion, and then they went up to 2.5 and then 4.5. So all of a sudden, they're growing rapidly in terms of valuation. They're trading in the secondary market around 5 billion, which is another 10% premium above their last valuation. What do you think of the current entry price?
Yeah, so the current price, roughly $37 a share at 5 billion. Yeah, I think, well, like I said, it's not crazy compared to some of the other AI multiples that we've seen in some of the other AI companies. But that said, like those companies have, I think, shown or have a much clearer, sort of less bumpy, theoretical vision for getting to larger scale. Whereas I think Glean has to sort of navigate this movement into non-traditional kind of AI adopter industries or places like finance where there's a lot of sort of red tape and little more that risk around if our data, is leaked or used to train models, or if people get access to it who shouldn't have access to it internally. So those will be sort of bigger lifts on the sales front, which I think might account in part for the lower multiple. But, again, I think it's a market that is really, really hot, have a lot of people excited. There's a lot of demand for the stock. So I don't necessarily see, that $37 price per share, $5 billion valuation as being out of bounds.
Let's say things became really competitive. What's the one thing that you think Glean focuses on as its key differentiator? What product or feature or capability, or what do you think about there?
Yeah, I think probably the integrations, because I think covering, now they have roughly 300, a little over 300 integrations with external apps. I think that has to be sort of the key focus because it's been so far the one thing that has been the least replicable about their strategy, because obviously anyone can throw an AI interface onto a data set or onto a collection of documents. So there might be innovations at the interface layer that they're not expecting, but I think the integrations part will really be key. And then obviously the sort of permissioning and all the stuff that goes into making it enterprise ready, because it is not hard to imagine a company sort of doing Glean for startups, SMBs, smaller mid-market companies, because again, it would be much simpler without as much sort of compliance risks. I would say probably the sort of extent being enterprise ready in all respects in terms of compliance and integrations would be the key differentiator for Glean.
If we were to enter today, obviously we need to think about what are the upside potentials or the risks in the coming years. How do you think about that as it relates to, a 3 to 5 year investment?
Yeah, definitely. I think one is sort of the phenomenon of experimental ARR, which folks have talked about. A lot of these AI companies are touting their recurring revenue or annualized revenue, and a lot of that is the result of kind of enterprises that want to do AI have received, a sort of a mandate to do AI and have signed up for products. And what remains to be seen is kind of what that year one, year two retention looks like on those. And so I think that would be a key thing with Glean is do customers sort of stick around and keep using it? Because it's still, it's unclear what the sort of adoption looks like. And I think one of the key things to look at there is the sort of DAU, MAU ratios that we're seeing on the business model front. So like it has impressive, they've reported this 40% ratio that people, 40% of people use it every day versus monthly, and that's very good. I think it's maybe also a reflection of the types of customers that they have who are more tech forward. So whether it can sort of expand that and project that out into non-traditional tech industries will be key. But yeah, I think yeah, it's all about usage and seeing the customers are actually using it and getting value.
Great. Okay. And then what do you think the IPO prospects are?
Mhm.
Meaning, is this the sort of thing that if I invested today, I should think about IPOing next year, or am I holding for 5+ years? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would think just about 5 years would be my guess. So I've been tired of this question every time we have a company because it's like it's always some company like Elon Musk's companies or Sam Altman's where they're like we're never going to go public. This is not like that. So Glean, Arvind was previously the CEO of Rubrik, the sort of data backups company, which he took public after 9 years. So we know that they're not sort of morally, temperamentally against the idea of IPOing. He did say fairly recently in a presentation that Glean is far away from going public, and they did just hit 100 million. So, they're not, I would say, not quite there, but I would say in the 2, 3 years to come, it's possible.
Got it. All right. So my final question is to put you on the spot. Are you a buyer today at 5 billion? And B, what do you think the price will be in about 3 years?
Nice. I think so. Yeah, I think I'm excited about Glean. I feel like they've carved out a really strong name. They have a really strong team, and it's not like they're sort of, recent attracted to the AI hype type company. They've been seriously working on this for a long time. Price wise, I think if I just look at my projections, yeah, I think let's say they're at 1 billion, um 1 billion ARR, 20 2028, 1.8 billion. I used to be better at mental math. 1.8 billion is like uh, 27 billion total market. So that's like the current price times five. Yeah, I could sort of I could see like a 125, 155 price per share. If things sort of go well and we don't enter a AI winter, that would be unexpected for me. Definitely upset my priors. Um, but yeah, I could see
Sorry,
that.
that's based on what enterprise value?
I think 27 billion-ish.
Oh, you could see it reach 27 billion in 3 years?
I think so. Let me just make sure I'm doing my math right here.
Nice. So
2028.
while you're doing your math, so many of you have asked where you could get these types of shares, whether it's Glean or others. So we're excited to be partnered with Upmarket for this briefing. So they're our partner for everything for everyday investors to be able to get into deals like this, whether it's pre-IPO or other alternative investments like hedge funds and others, private equity or even real estate. So thank you, Upmarket, for partnering with us. If any of you have any questions, we'll share the link here as well as the link for Vincent. And we'll be sure to have this video available afterwards. So while I was putting you on the spot there, I mean, my personal perspective is that this has a little bit less volatility. What I mean by that is I think the downside is a little bit less, and I think the upside is a little bit less. I'm not a huge fan that they don't have as much proprietary software and it's much more about stitching things together. I do think stitching things together is awesome, but it's hard for me to see it being like some breakout, massive, proprietary, huge $100 billion plus company. But I could be wrong. I do think they have an incredible team, obviously, with the Rubrik CEO and having really great pedigree from other companies. I don't think it's cheap, but I do think it's the sort of company that grinds forward because this capability is just the future. It's obvious. It's just a matter of how competitive will the market be in terms of how much market share they could eat up. So those are my quick thoughts. Jan-Erik, what were you going to say on valuation?
No, I think I confirmed. Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say I think I could see, the 25 billion in 3 years. I think is plausible given sort of the, momentum, given what we're seeing on the AI advancements improvement front. But a lot of it hinges on selling it into the kinds of companies that don't adopt this technology necessarily and building really great interfaces into it for sort of the everyday person to be able to use and get value out of in a way that, OpenAI, Anthropic haven't really done. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
it's a big product lift.
if they go after financial services, retail, and manufacturing, which is the three verticals you mentioned. Retail and manufacturing sometimes are not on the cutting edge of technology. If they're able to just eat up a ton of market share there, I mean, I could see 25 billion. I mean, that's not something to sneeze at. It's not a huge valuation like OpenAI has, but if you come in at five and it's worth 25, a 5x is nice in a few years for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Jan-Erik, thank you very much. Everybody who added their questions, thank you for joining and participating. And we look forward to having you join for our next one. Have a good one.